There's a bathroom stall at the highway rest stop where I work that has not been closed, not for a single hour, not for cleaning, not for repairs, not for anything, and as long as anyone on staff can tell me. I've asked. Nobody has an answer that goes back further than, that's just how it's always been since I started. I want to walk you through this whole thing in order, because it took me the better part of a year working there to understand that the stall was never really the strange part. It was just the part one could see. I took the overnight facilities job at the Route 71 rest area, mile marker 214, out in rural Indiana, because it was steady state work with decent benefits and because I liked the idea of a job where I'd mostly be alone. If you've ever driven a long interstate stretch late at night, you know the kind of place I mean. Vending machines, a bank of restrooms, a little visitor info kiosk nobody staffed since the 90s, picnic tables nobody uses after dark, and a parking lot that's either dead empty or scattered with a handful of long-haul trucks whose drivers are catching a few hours of sleep in the cab. My job was simple on paper. Keep the restrooms clean and stocked, keep the vending machines running, do a walkthrough of the grounds every couple hours, handle any maintenance issues that came up overnight before the day crew arrived. Dean Achterberg trained me. 11 years on that route by the time I started, built like a guy who'd spent those 11 years doing actual physical work instead of getting soft behind a desk, the kind of man who explained everything about the job in complete, patient detail, the cleaning schedule, the supply ordering system, which vending machine jammed if you didn't hit the coin return just right, except for one thing which he saved for my last training shift, the night before he was handing the building off to me for good. He walked me into the men's restroom in the west building, past 6 ordinary stalls, to a 7th at the end of the row. Door shut. Light on inside, visible in the gap under the door, that dim greenish cast fluorescent tubes get after years of use. Stall 7, Dean said. You don't close this door. Ever. Not to clean it, not to fix anything in it, not for any reason. You don't turn that light off even during a bulb change. You replace the bulb with the door held open the whole time, work fast, and you don't let that room go dark, not even for a second. And if you ever come in here and find that door shut with the light off inside, you do not open it yourself. You leave the building, you call it in, and you wait outside until someone else arrives. I asked him, obviously, what was actually in there. He said, nothing most nights. That's the whole point. It stays a nothing as long as you follow the rule. Then he handed me a laminated maintenance log, standard binder for tracking cleaning schedules and supply restocks for every fixture in the building, except the page for stall 7 had been torn out. Not missing accidentally, not water damaged. Torn, clean along one edge like someone had removed it on purpose a long time ago and never replaced it. Why's that page gone? Dean was quiet for a second. Because there's nothing to log, he said. You don't clean that stall. You don't touch anything in it. It doesn't get a page. That was the end of the conversation. He finished the rest of my training over the following days without bringing stall 7 up again, and on his last night handing the building off to me for good, all he said, standing in the parking lot next to his truck, headlights already on, was, 11 years, I never had to use the door shut rule. Doesn't mean you won't. Just means you follow it exactly if you do. For the first month on my own, the rule was easy enough to live with. I did my walkthroughs, cleaned the 6 normal stalls, restocked the vending machines, and left stall 7's door open and its light burning the whole time, the way I'd been shown. It became routine fast, the kind of small oddity a job settles into without you thinking much about it anymore. Like how every job has one light switch that does something nobody's bothered to explain, or one door that sticks in humid weather. You stop asking why. You just work around it. Then, about 5 weeks in, I found the door shut for the first time. It was a Tuesday, close to 1 a.m., dead quiet, maybe 2 trucks parked out in the lot with their drivers asleep inside. I did my normal walkthrough of the West Building restroom and I saw it before I was even fully through the door. Stall 7 shut tight, no light bleeding out from underneath. I want to be honest about how I handled this because I didn't handle it perfectly. My first instinct wasn't to follow Dean's rule. My first instinct was to assume someone had actually used the stall. A trucker, maybe someone passing through who didn't know or care about whatever informal policy the facility staff kept, and had simply shut the door behind them the normal way a person does, and the light had burned out at the same time by pure coincidence. That felt like the obvious explanation, the boring one, and boring explanations are usually right. I almost knocked on it. I actually raised my hand to knock, out of basic manners more than anything, the kind of reflexive courtesy you extend to a closed bathroom stall even when you're the maintenance guy checking on it. Something stopped me right before my knuckles hit the door. I still can't tell you exactly what, some instinct lower down than conscious thought, and instead I backed out of that restroom, walked out to the parking lot, and called it in exactly the way Dean had trained me to. Dispatch for the facility maintenance company took the call calmly, almost too calmly, like this wasn't the first time they'd heard it. Told me someone would be out within the hour, told me to wait outside the building and not go back in until they arrived. I sat in my own car in that parking lot for 53 minutes. I know the exact number because I watched the clock the entire time, watching that dark restroom building from a distance, telling myself I was being ridiculous, and also not once getting out of the car to check. A van showed up a little after 2 a.m. Two guys, full coveralls, the kind of specialized gear that looked more like hazmat protocol than routine plumbing repair. They didn't introduce themselves. They went in together and I wasn't invited to follow and I didn't ask to. They were in there almost 20 minutes. When they came out, one of them was carrying a small sealed container, metal about the size of a cooler, handled carefully with both hands the way you'd carry something that might spill or might bite. The other one told me flat, no further detail offered, that the light bulb had blown and the door had swung shut on its own from a draft, nothing more, and that everything was back to normal. He handed me a fresh laminated instruction card, identical wording to what Dean had already told me, and left without answering a single question I tried to ask. I went back inside once they'd driven off. Light was on. Door was open exactly the way it was supposed to be. I stood in that doorway for a long time before I made myself go back to finishing my shift. I didn't sleep well the next several days. Every strange detail from that night kept circling back in my head. The 2Com dispatcher, the sealed container, the fact that two guys in specialized gear had responded within an hour to what was supposedly just a burnt-out bulb and a door that swung shut from a draft, in a building with no windows and no significant airflow to speak of. I brought it up with Dean about a week later. I still had his number from training, and I called him more out of a need to hear a reasonable explanation from someone I trusted than any real expectation he'd give me one. He was quiet for a long moment on the phone. "First time's always the hardest," he finally said. "Gets easier to just follow the rule and not ask questions after that. I know that's not the answer you want. Is it always the same? Door shut, light out, call it in, guys show up?" "Mostly," he said. "Not always the same guys who show up though. And it's not always as fast as 50 minutes. Some nights it takes longer for anybody to come. Those are worse nights." I asked him what happens on those nights, the ones where nobody arrives quickly. He didn't answer that question at all. He just told me to keep following the rule exactly, every time, no matter how long the wait, and hung up before I could push further. Over the following months, the door shut incident happened 3 more times, roughly one every 6 to 8 weeks, always following the same rough pattern. Door found shut and dark during a walkthrough, always called in immediately, always a wait of anywhere from 40 minutes to just over 2 hours before a response team arrived, always some variation of the same explanation afterward that didn't actually explain anything. I stopped expecting real answers. I started just doing my job the way Dean had taught me, treating it the way you treat any dangerous piece of equipment at a workplace. Not understanding it, just respecting it. The third incident stands out from the others, because it's the one where I finally noticed something with my own senses instead of just my eyes. It happened on a warm night in early summer, humid enough that the whole building smelled faintly of standing water no matter how well the ventilation ran. I found the door shut the way I always did, called it in, and went to wait outside. But this time, standing near the propped open entrance while I waited for a callback confirmation, I caught a smell drifting out from inside the building that had nothing to do with the usual humidity or cleaning chemicals. Cold. Sure. Almost metallic, the way the air smells right before a heavy snow, except it was 90 degrees outside and there was nothing in that building that should have been producing cold air at all, let alone air that carried that particular mineral edge to it. It lasted maybe 90 seconds and then was simply gone, replaced by the ordinary humid smell again, like someone had opened and shut an unseen window somewhere deep in the building. I mentioned that detail to the response team when they finally arrived that night. Neither of them reacted visibly, but one of them made a note on a small handheld device before going in, the kind of gesture that told me this wasn't the first time someone had reported that particular smell, even if nobody was going to confirm that out loud. I stopped expecting real answers and I started just doing my job the way Dean had taught me. It was the fifth incident several months later that finally taught me why the job mattered as much as it did, because that was the night I learned about Wade Furlong. The fifth incident happened differently from the start. It was late fall by then, close to a year into the job, a cold night with almost no traffic through the rest area at all. I did my 11 p.m. walkthrough and found the door shut, light out, same as every time before. I called it in the same way. Dispatch told me a response team was 30 to 40 minutes out. 2 hours later, nobody had come. I sat in my car the entire time, same as always, watching that dark building, and somewhere around the 90-minute mark, headlights pulled into the lot. Not a company van, just an ordinary pickup truck, older model, and an older man got out of it alone. No coveralls, no specialized gear, just a flashlight and a look on his face like he'd been dragged out of bed for something he'd hoped never to deal with again. He introduced himself as a retired maintenance contractor named Otto Bear, told me the regular response team was tied up on another call 2 counties over and he'd been asked to cover as backup, which apparently happened sometimes given how understaffed this particular kind of work was. He didn't go in right away. He stood in the parking lot with me for a few minutes first, looking at that building, and he was the first person in that entire year to actually talk to me honestly about what I'd been dealing with. He told me about Wade Furlong. Wade worked the overnight shift at that same rest area almost 4 years before I did. Good worker by every account Otto gave me, reliable, well-liked by the small handful of people who worked the surrounding stretch of highway facilities. Wade had the same training Dean gave me, the same rule about stall 7, and he followed it without issue for the better part of a year. Then one night, running behind on his cleaning schedule and irritated at how much time the open door, always lit stall wasted compared to every other fixture in the building, Wade propped the door shut with a rubber wedge during his cleaning rounds, just for the 20 minutes it took him to mop that section of floor, reasoning that a brief, deliberate closure for cleaning purposes was different from the uncontrolled kind the rule was actually warning against. He put the wedge in himself. He was the one who shut it, on purpose, fully intending to reopen it the moment he was done. Otto said that when Wade went to remove the wedge and reopen the door, it wouldn't budge. Not stuck, not jammed, just immovable in a way that made no physical sense for a standard restroom stall door. He called it in the way he was supposed to and waited. Response team arrived within the hour that time, went in, and came back out with the same kind of sealed container Marty had seen, except this time, according to Otto, who'd heard this secondhand from someone who worked with Wade directly, one of the responders told Wade, quietly, that he needed to request an immediate facility transfer, effective that same week, no exceptions, for his own good. Wade put in for the transfer the next morning. Company approved it fast, faster than transfer requests usually moved, and Wade was told he'd been reassigned to a different rest area facility 3 counties over, effective the following Monday. He never showed up to that new facility. Otto said the receiving supervisor called around asking if anyone knew where he was, and nobody had an answer. His apartment was found still furnished, rent paid up through the following month, no sign of a planned departure. His truck was found parked at his own apartment complex, untouched, keys still in it. The company's official record, as far as Otto understood it, listed him as voluntarily separated, transfer never completed, whereabouts unknown, case closed without much further investigation because a grown man choosing to disappear isn't technically a crime. I don't think he transferred anywhere, Otto told me, standing in that cold parking lot. I think whatever's in there took something from him the second that door wouldn't open back up, and by the time they got him out, there wasn't enough of him left in the way that matters to actually go be a person somewhere else. I asked Otto if he believed that literally or if he meant it more like a figure of speech, some way of saying Wade had been shaken bad enough to just vanish out of a normal life. Otto looked at me for a long moment before he answered. I've been doing emergency backup calls to places like this for almost 20 years, he said. I've stopped asking myself which kind of true it is. Doesn't change what I'm supposed to do when the phone rings. Then he told me something that changed how I understood every conversation I'd had with Dean up to that point. He said Dean hadn't just heard about Wade Furlong secondhand the way I had. Dean had trained him, same as he'd trained me, same laminated card, same restroom walkthrough, and Dean had been the one working the overnight shift the night Wade decided to wedge that door shut. Dean was the one who found the wedge jammed and the door immovable. Dean was the one who made the call. He doesn't talk about it, Otto said. Far as I know, he's never told a new hire straight out that it happened on his watch. Just tells them the rule, tells them it matters, and lets them fill in the rest for themselves. He looked at me carefully. You should know that about him. Everything he ever told you about following that rule exactly, no shortcuts, no bending it, that's not policy talking. That's a man who watched a friend disappear because of 20 careless minutes, and has spent every year since making sure it doesn't happen to the next person standing where Wade stood. I didn't say anything for a while after that. I thought about every phone call I'd had with Dean since he left the job, how patient he always was, how he never once seemed annoyed by my questions even when he wouldn't answer them, how he always circled back to the same core instruction no matter what I actually asked him. I'd taken that for simple professionalism. I understood now it was something closer to penance, paid out one careful phone call at a time to a man he'd never met before training him. He went inside then, finally, alone, the same way the regular teams always had, and came out about 15 minutes later carrying the same kind of sealed container, handled the same careful two-handed way. He told me the same thing every response team had always told me: burnt bulb, door swung shut on its own, nothing more to it. But this time, handing me the fresh instruction card, his hand was shaking slightly, just enough that I noticed, the same way I'd later learned to recognize in other people who'd spent too long standing too close to whatever this actually was. Before he drove off, he gave me one more piece of advice, unprompted. Don't ever be the one who tries to open that wedge yourself, he said. Whatever you do, let it stay stuck. Let someone else handle it. That's the whole job, really. Not fixing it. Just not making it worse. I asked him one more question before he left, the thing I'd been most afraid to ask directly all night. I asked whether he thought Wade had done anything specifically wrong beyond the wedge itself that made things go as badly as they did, whether there was some additional mistake buried in the story that I could learn from and specifically avoid. Otto thought about that for a while, leaning against his truck in the cold before he answered. I think the mistake was believing he understood the rule well enough to bend it a little, he said. 20 minutes, he figured. A controlled closure instead of an uncontrolled one. Like the rule was really about tidiness, about the door being properly reopened afterward, instead of being about the door never closing at all, for any reason, under any control, no matter how brief or well-intentioned. He shook his head. That's the trap, I think. Not malice. Not carelessness even. Just a smart, careful man deciding he understood a rule better than the rule actually needed him to. That stuck with me longer than almost anything else Otto told me that night, and it sat differently once I knew Dean had been the one on the other end of that phone call, the one who'd had to make it. I started to understand, standing in that parking lot, what the rule was actually for. It never was about protecting whoever worked the overnight shift, not really, not in the way I'd assumed. Dean followed it and made sure I followed it, not because it kept us safe first. It kept whatever waited behind that door contained, kept it from reaching a parking lot full of sleeping truckers, a highway full of ordinary cars, an entire county that had no idea how close it sat to something that didn't belong. We weren't the ones the rule was protecting. We were how everyone else stayed protected. I thought about it every single time I found myself tempted, in later months, to take some small shortcut with my own routine, skipping a step in the cleaning schedule, propping something for convenience, the 100 tiny negotiations every job eventually tempts you into once you've done it long enough to feel confident. I never let myself take those shortcuts with stall 7, not once, not even on the busiest, most exhausting nights, because I never wanted to find out firsthand what Otto meant by that trap, and I never wanted to be the reason Dean had to make a call like that twice. I thought about Wade Furlong more than I thought about almost anything else that year. I started noticing, on quiet nights, that I'd unconsciously checked that door 2 or 3 extra times per shift, not because the rule required it, but because some part of me needed reassurance of seeing it open and lit over and over, like checking that a stove's really off. I want to tell you about something else I noticed that year, something that felt unrelated to stall 7 at first, until it stopped feeling that way. A woman named Sheila Pruitt worked the day shift at the same facility, restocking the info kiosk and handling the picnic area, and we overlapped briefly during shift changes a few mornings a week. One morning, over nothing more than idle small talk, she mentioned that she used to keep a small potted plant on the counter of the info kiosk years back, and that plant had never once needed watering the entire 2 years she kept it there, despite her deliberately never watering it herself, as a running joke with a coworker to test whether someone else was tending it secretly. She finally threw it out, unnerved, when she realized nobody else had a key to that locked kiosk besides her, and there was no possible way anyone or anything could have been watering it during all those months it sat there thriving on its own. She laughed about it when she told me. I didn't. I just filed it away and started paying closer attention to whether anything else about the property felt inconsistent in ways I hadn't noticed before. It didn't take long to find more. Our facility is listed as mile marker 214 on every current sign and piece of paperwork, but an older State Department of Transportation survey, digitized from the 70s, lists the same coordinates, the same building footprint as mile marker 215, and 3 more archived documents spanning different decades disagree with each other the same way, one of them leaving the marker number blank entirely. A regional trucking forum turned up a handful of drivers, different years, no connection to each other, who'd all separately mentioned their GPS losing the facility for a few seconds while passing it at night, the exit briefly vanishing from the display before reappearing like nothing happened. And the vending machine in the West Building lobby, according to the supply driver who serviced it, carried a serial number that matched no unit in his company's inventory database. Checked twice, never resolved, eventually just overridden in their system so deliveries could keep processing. None of this, on its own, felt as urgent or as frightening as stall 7. But taken together, it started to feel like the whole facility, not just one bathroom stall, sat slightly outside whatever rules governed the rest of the world around it, like the entire building had been built on some kind of seam, and stall 7 was just the one place where that seam happened to show most clearly. I didn't understand what any of it actually meant until the final night I want to tell you about, the night everything came together at once. It was almost exactly 2 years into the job, close to 3 a.m. on a night with dense fog rolling low across the highway, thick enough that headlights on the interstate barely cut through it from the rest area, thinning traffic down to almost nothing. I did my walkthrough of the West Building and found stall 7's door shut, light out, the same pattern I'd seen 5 times before by that point. I called it in exactly the way I always did. Dispatch told me a response team was on the way, no specific time estimate given, which had never happened before. Every previous call had come with at least a rough window. I sat in my car in the fog, watching that dark building, and I want to tell you honestly that the waiting felt different this time, wrong in a way I couldn't articulate until the wait passed the 2-hour mark with no headlights turning into that lot at all. The fog made everything worse. It rolled in low and thick off the highway, swallowing the parking lot lights until they became soft orange smudges instead of clear points, and the building itself seemed to recede and reappear in patches depending on how the fog moved, so that for long stretches I genuinely couldn't tell if I was watching the actual structure or just my own mind filling in the shape of it from memory. I kept my phone in my hand the entire time, no signal bars at all for almost 40 minutes despite the tower less than 2 miles up the highway, which had never happened before either. When the signal finally returned, there were no missed calls, no messages, nothing to explain the gap. Just silence and then a bar of signal, like the outage had simply decided to end on its own schedule. Around 5:15 a.m., close to 3 hours after my initial call, with no response team, no callback from dispatch, and first light just barely starting to gray the edges of the fog, I heard something from inside the building that I had never heard during any of the previous incidents. A sound like the door itself, straining, wood and metal groaning under pressure, slow and rhythmic like something on the other side was testing whether it could still move. I called dispatch again. This time the woman who answered didn't have the same practiced calm the previous calls always carried. She told me, quieter than before, that the regional response team had been unreachable for the past 40 minutes, that she was escalating the call to an emergency backup contact, and that under no circumstances was I to enter that building until someone physically arrived, no matter what I heard. I asked her, point blank, what would happen if nobody came before the sound stopped on its own. She didn't answer that question. She just repeated the instruction to wait, and the line went quiet. The straining sound continued on and off for almost another hour, and somewhere in that stretch of waiting, alone in my car with the fog pressing against the windows, I finally did the thing I probably shouldn't tell you I did, except that it's the reason I'm able to tell you any of this at all. Before I tell you what I saw at the window, I need to back up and mention one more incident, the sixth door shut occurrence, which happened about 4 months before that foggy morning, and which I've been saving because it's the one that made the final night make sense in hindsight. That sixth incident followed the usual pattern almost exactly. Door shut, light out, called in, a wait just under 2 hours before headlights finally appeared. The responder that night was a woman, the first woman I'd ever seen show up for one of these calls, introduced herself only as Priya, moved with the same practiced urgency I'd come to recognize in everyone who did this work seriously. She went in alone, same as always, and came out about 25 minutes later with the usual sealed container, but she looked different afterward than the others had, not shaken exactly, more thoughtful, like something in there had given her something to think about rather than something to fear. Before she left, she told me something none of the others ever had. She said that whatever was contained in that stall wasn't static. It changed subtly over time, the way anything does when it's kept somewhere long enough, and that some of the newer people on her team had started referring to it informally by a kind of shorthand nickname among themselves, not out of disrespect but because saying its real designation out loud too often apparently made people uneasy in ways they couldn't fully explain. I asked her what the nickname was. The guest, she said, because it never leaves and it never really arrives either. It's just always already there, the way an unwanted guest overstays past the point where anyone remembers inviting them in the first place. That name stuck with me longer than I expected it to. I finally did the thing I probably shouldn't tell you I did that foggy morning, except that it's the reason I'm able to tell you any of this at all. I got out of my car, walked close enough to the building to see through the west building's front glass doors without actually going inside, and looked down that row of stalls toward the seventh one at the end. The door was still shut. But the light, the greenish fluorescent glow that had never once, in 2 years, gone fully dark even during the door shut incidents, was flickering now, faint pulses of light escaping from underneath, like something was moving back and forth in front of the bulb inside, blocking and unblocking it in an unsteady rhythm that didn't match anything mechanical. Then, for exactly 1 second, the door bulged. I don't know how else to describe it. Not shook. Not rattled against the frame the way a door does when someone shoves it from the other side. The whole flat surface of it flexed outward toward me, toward the row of open stalls and the exit and the parking lot and the fog and everything else on this side of that wall, the way a sail bulges when it catches wind, like the door itself had gone soft for that 1 second and something behind it had leaned its full weight forward to test how far it could go. And then it snapped back flat all at once, and the flickering stopped, and the restroom went completely, unnaturally silent. No fluorescent hum, no vent fan, nothing for maybe 3 full seconds, before every ordinary sound in that building switched back on together, all at once like someone had thrown a breaker. I did not go any closer. I backed out of that entryway and got back in my car, and I have not, in the time since, found a way to describe that image to anyone that makes it sound like anything other than exactly what I just told you. It almost got out. I don't know what out would have meant. I've spent a long time being grateful I never had to find out. A pickup truck finally pulled into the lot a little after 6:15 a.m., full daylight by then, fog starting to burn off. It wasn't Otto Bear this time. It was someone I hadn't met before, a younger guy, maybe 30, moving with the kind of practiced urgency of someone who'd done this exact job many times and knew exactly how bad a 3-hour delay actually was. He didn't ask me many questions. He just grabbed a case of equipment from his truck bed and told me to stay outside no matter what, and went in alone. He was in there almost 40 minutes, far longer than any previous response I'd witnessed. When he finally came back out, he was carrying 2 sealed containers instead of the usual one, and he looked considerably more shaken than any responder I'd dealt with before, including Otto. He didn't offer the usual scripted explanation about a burnt bulb and a draft. He just told me flatly that the facility would need to be temporarily closed for emergency maintenance, effective immediately, and that I should go home and expect a call about my schedule within the next day or 2. Before he got back in his truck, I asked him, the same way I'd once asked Otto, whether he actually knew what was in there. He looked at me for a long moment, clearly deciding how much to say, and finally told me one thing. 3 hours is too long for that door to stay shut, he said. That's never supposed to happen. Whoever handles the scheduling on the response side needs to answer for tonight, because if I'd been another 20 minutes later, I don't think that door holds at all. The facility closed for 6 days. When it reopened, there was new signage on stall 7. A small laminated notice, simple and bureaucratic looking, claiming the stall was closed indefinitely for plumbing repairs, with yellow caution tape strung across the doorway. I was told when I returned to work that a different rule now applied. I was no longer required to keep that door open or that light on at all. I was simply told never to remove the caution tape, never to enter that stall for any reason, and to report immediately if the tape was ever found removed or disturbed on its own. I don't know what changed structurally, or what almost happened that foggy morning, or what would have happened if that door had actually given way before help arrived. Nobody above me has ever explained it, and by that point I'd stopped expecting anyone to. I want to tell you about one more thing that happened during those 3 years, something that had nothing directly to do with stall 7, but that I think about almost as often because it's the only part of this whole story that ever felt gentle instead of frightening. It was a bitter cold night in January, maybe 6 months after the Wade Furlong conversation with Otto, and a long-haul trucker pulled into the lot close to 4 a.m., parked, and instead of sleeping in his cab like most drivers did, came inside the West Building lobby and sat at one of the little vending machine tables for almost 2 hours, nursing a coffee, clearly not in any hurry to get back on the road. I didn't think much of it at first. Truckers keep strange hours, plenty of them just need a break from the cab for a while. But eventually he struck up a conversation with me, unprompted, the way people sometimes do at 4 in the morning when the whole world feels smaller and more honest than it does in daylight. He told me he'd been driving this same stretch of highway for almost 20 years, long enough to remember 3 or 4 different rest area buildings on this exact site, going back to a much smaller facility that used to stand here before this one was built. He said he always stopped at this particular rest area specifically, skipping 2 closer ones, because something about it felt safer to him than the alternatives, though he couldn't explain exactly why. He talked for a while about his daughter, about missing her recitals and her birthdays over the years because of the job, about how he'd started timing his routes specifically so he could make it home for the ones that mattered most, even if it meant driving through nights like this one, cold and empty, just to be there in the morning. He never once mentioned stall 7 or anything strange about the building at all. He just talked, warm and unhurried, about his daughter and his years on the road, and eventually thanked me for the coffee and the company, told me to take care of myself out here, and headed back out to his truck to finish his drive. I never saw him again after that night, and I don't know his name, and I have no reason to think he was anything other than exactly what he appeared to be, a tired father missing his kid, taking comfort in an ordinary conversation with a stranger at 4 in the morning. But I think about him more than almost anyone else from those 3 years, because for those 2 hours, that building felt like exactly what it was supposed to be. A safe place to stop. Nothing more complicated than that. I hold on to that memory on the nights when everything else about this job feels heavier than it should. About 3 weeks after the facility reopened, I was doing routine paperwork filing during a slow overnight shift, sorting a backlog of maintenance requisition forms that had piled up during the closure, mostly boring stuff, replacement parts, cleaning supply orders, equipment authorization forms for the emergency work that had been done. Buried near the bottom of that stack was a requisition slip authorizing the specialized containment equipment used during the closure, the kind of internal paperwork I wasn't necessarily supposed to see but nobody had bothered to route separately. It was signed at the bottom, in blocky, efficient handwriting, by someone listed only as R. Talbot, Facilities. I sat with that piece of paper longer than I probably should have. I didn't know at that point whether it meant anything at all. Talbot isn't an especially rare name, and for all I knew this was some regional facilities coordinator with no connection whatsoever to anything strange. But something about seeing that name attached, in official capacity, to whatever had almost happened in that building, settled into me in a way I couldn't shake. I asked Dean about it, one more call, probably my last real conversation with him before he stopped picking up entirely. I asked if he knew anyone named Talbot connected to the company. He was quiet for longer than usual this time. Then he said, "Facilities like ours, the ones with rules nobody explains properly, there's a name that comes up more than it should on paperwork nobody's supposed to actually read closely. I've seen it maybe 4 or 5 times over the years, different departments, different states, always just initials and a last name. Never met the man. Don't know anyone who has. I've stopped asking whether it's one person doing an awful lot of traveling, or something wearing that name the way you'd wear a coat, moving between places that all seem to need the same kind of quiet handling." I asked him if he thought I should be worried about it. "I think you already are," he said. "That's usually how it starts." I still work that rest area. Stall 7 stays closed now, tape intact, exactly the way I was instructed, and I've never once been tempted to test that particular rule the way Wade Furlong once tested his. The mile marker on the exit sign still reads 214. I checked the state's digital survey database again a few months ago, out of habit more than anything, and the archived version from that same year had already updated to match 214, consistent across every record I could find, like whatever inconsistency I'd noticed years earlier had simply been resolved quietly without anyone ever acknowledging it had existed in the first place. I think about stories like this one sometimes, the sort you hear about from someone in a similar line of work, another driver, another attendant, another guy holding down some overnight post at some out-of-the-way facility, who mentions in passing a rule that doesn't make sense until you've lived close enough to it to understand why it exists. I've started noticing more than I used to how many of those stories share the same shape. A rule. A door. A name that only shows up on paperwork nobody reads closely. I don't know how many places are out there running on rules like the one that's kept me safe for going on 3 years now. I don't know how many of them have their own Wade Furlong, their own version of me sitting alone in a parking lot at 3 a.m., watching a door and waiting for someone to come. I keep doing my walkthroughs. I keep checking the tape on stall 7 every single shift, even though I'm no longer required to. A few nights ago, I noticed a single corner of it had peeled up half an inch from the door frame. Age, probably humidity, the boring explanation that's usually right. I pressed it back down, logged it out of habit, and finished the shift without incident. I haven't checked it again tonight yet. I'm writing this during my break, sitting in my car in the same spot I always sit, and some part of me isn't in a hurry to go find out. What I understood that foggy morning, and what I've carried with me every shift since, is that the rule was never really about keeping me safe. Dean followed it and made sure I followed it because he already knew what it costs when it fails. Not the worker, but everyone past that parking lot who never knows how close they came. I'm just the latest one in a long line of people holding a door shut with nothing more than a rule and a laminated card, standing watch so nobody else ever has to know what I know, waiting for someone else to come take the next shift.